Welcome back. This is part 2 of the Scrum Razor story. I'm fortunate here to be here with David Ingram from Gillette. Hi Dave, welcome back.
Hi Dave, thank you.
Now in this segment we want to talk a little about scaling. So you had an amazing successful project. You delivered one of the best razors that Gillette have delivered for a long time, the exfoliating Gillette razor, which I used this morning. Everything was awesome. So now obviously you're using this approach over and over again. You're just scaling the heck out of it. Is that right?
No.
Oh dear.
In a word, Dave, no.
Oh dear. So tell me, what is happening? I mean, you did have success. I think everybody can accept that.
The razor's a fantastic success. It's the best razor that we've ever made. Consumers love it. We developed it in less time than we'd ever developed a product like this before. So huge success. Not on scaling Scrum though, and really, when you look at it, I think it's what's interesting there is that in our exfoliating razor project, Scrum was a tool that we used to solve this problem that we had. How do we develop the best ever razor we've developed in less time than we've ever done it, in a world that's very different from the world for any other razor that we developed? So really clear, compelling problem that said, we need to use a great methodology here, a way of designing. As you step away from our exfoliating razor project then, and you look at, okay, we're going to scale this, not every project has that same set of problems that you're trying to solve for. So it's a difficult sell to go to a team that feels that their project is really working quite well, thank you very much, and say, why don't you stop the way that you're doing this that seems to be working quite well, and do something else instead. Use this new process and this new method. And that's really where scaling Scrum and Agile methods gets really interesting in a company like Gillette or in Procter & Gamble.
So, ultimately the reason why it was a success on the exfoliating razor project, or the Scrum Razor project as I like to call it, sorry, your marketing people are like, oh no. But the reason why it's a success is because you had some compellingly difficult challenges that you needed to deal with to deliver this razor. But obviously, Gillette and Procter & Gamble are continually delivering stuff all the time, and they have processes and they have approaches that don't necessarily encourage a change, because as interesting as you and I are about Scrum and Agile and the future of work, most people are interested in doing the work that they're doing, delivering the products that they're doing, and are less interested in that. So how are you going about making the change? Are you making the change?
Yeah, we are making the change. And we've tried a couple of different approaches. This is not a one and done kind of approach. But, we tried first to say, let's try and apply it uniformly across our teams. It didn't really work. You taking a step back and looking at Procter & Gamble in general, we have a very established waterfall process culture. That works very, very well. We're a fantastically successful company making products that delight our consumers every day and that they highly value. As you say, breaking into that and doing something different then, there needs to be a compelling reason. And just saying, let's throw away our waterfall process for this other process called Scrum, without having a compelling reason to do it, is a very, very difficult sell. Because everyone is very busy, everyone's focused on what they need to do. They don't really want to stop doing what works to try something out. For what reason? Yeah. Everything's working very well, thank you very much. So without that reason it's just another tool. Scrum is just another tool. And that's where we found that selling a tool internally, really nobody's interested in buying what you're selling. You have some problems.
Obviously that disappoints me as, being the home of Scrum here, but I totally get it. There's no reason if it ain't broke, don't fix it,
exactly.
Right? So what are you doing then? Because I understand that, nothing's perfect. You can always improve. There's lots of drivers to do a different way of working, but why, what is happening? How are you introducing the change?
Really the way that we're looking at it really is, there are really 3 elements that we're looking at. The first is, what are the tools that can really help us? And Scrum is part of the answer there. That is absolutely for sure. The other two areas is our organization set up and designed in a way that they can adopt Scrum, from a multifunctional approach with different functional work streams being done. Are we organized in a way that we can effectively change the way that our work gets done?
Yeah.
And the last one is cultural. A lot of working in an agile way is psychological safety and trust and servant leadership. Are we set up culturally to be able to adopt these agile practices? And really what we found is that, rather than focus on just the first bucket of the tool, we need to work on all three of those buckets in parallel and different ones at different times to be able to make progress across becoming more agile as an organization.
So talk a little bit about the organizational structure, because you're right, Scrum is all about cross-functional teams, and agile and flexible, dynamic sort of agile is all about cross-functional teams, multidiscipline teams, focused on clear outcomes. How is a discipline-centric or a specialization of labor-centric kind of organization, which is what the Industrial Revolution really created, and Gillette was sort of like one of the leaders in the Industrial Revolution here in Boston. How do you move from that functional orientation to a more cross-functional model?
And you hit a great part of that there, Dave, which is, really it comes back, one of the fundamental principles that have been very important for us is product ownership, rather than discipline ownership.
Okay.
And so we've actually reorganized our teams around product ownership rather than discipline ownership lines. It's critically important for us because we have such very talented scientists, engineers, marketers, finance people. It's critically important to keep that discipline mastery. But what we've needed to do is flip our organization design to have one of the primary focuses being accountability and product ownership. And we've actually just redesigned around those lines such that between our technical and commercial teams, we have these product ownership teams or the teams of people that are clearly aligned to a common set of goals. Yeah. And that's been a big reorganization for us. What we're finding is that that's the organizational bit fixed. The other thing that gives us is the longevity of objective. We don't just form a team for a project, disband the team and work on the next project. We've given these teams value creation goals over multiple years that they're accountable for. So they're thinking now and in the long term, and there's some longevity in the thinking. We've also given an identity. If you form a project team and break it up every time, that team has no identity. So when you look at building psychological safety and trust and understanding the problems to be solved and the opportunities, if your project's only lasting 18 months, you'll just get on with it and hope it's better in the next one. If you have a team that's there together and you say, this is the team, we're responsible for this, the team becomes more accountable to solve their own issues, to identify and solve their own issues. And that's a big part of us looking then at how do we start to leverage tools like Scrum to go and achieve what these teams need to do.
Wow. So aligning teams of people with a clear sort of like set of external outcomes, product outcomes, and then giving them that longevity allows them to then improve, focus on innovation, deliver, build each other's skills up, help each other to get better. I think that's really interesting. It's funny, when I left university in the early 90s, I was a software engineer, went to work for an insurance company, still know nothing about insurance. I literally just sat there and got these processed PCRs, program change requests, wrote, did my stuff. No innovation, no ownership. Didn't really, I probably cared if the customer liked it, but didn't know about the customer, was so far away from it. What you're doing is flipping to an organization that's more aligned to your customer, more aligned to your outcomes, more empowered around that. Do people like it?
Yes. Remember that we've had an organization that's organized around functional expertise for a very long time.
Yeah.
And that is your norm. So we're right now in the process of everyone is excited about our reorganization and thinks it's the right thing to do. It's incredibly empowering for the organization, but you can imagine that there's an awful lot of processes and pipes to reconnect, and how do we get the work done, and who does this and who does that. They were kind of running automatically, right? You never had to look at them, and now you need to re-examine them. Now that is both a daunting thing and a good thing, because when these things come up, you have to deal with them. If you're transparent and you're looking at the things you need to fix, we need to address them. But it also creates those opportunities to say, oh, have we really been doing this way for this long? Do we need to do this? Or is there a different way to do this? Or how might we do this now that it's 2022? That creates actually a whole set of opportunities to do our work differently. And the opportunity we're finding is that rather than view the organization structure as fixed, if we can view it more as something that we collectively own and we can use to address challenges, it's a big culture shift. I talked about that culture bucket. That's a big culture shift for us, from a fixed organization design mindset to a flexible problem-solving mindset. Also starts to get us into different discussions than we've had before.
Well, I'm sure historically the process was never owned by the people doing the process, but now I guess they own more of it, right? They feel more empowered to make those changes. That's a big change as well, right?
It is a big change. I mean, we still are here as a company that at some point needs to spend capital. We're still making physical products at the end of the day. So those milestones for investing capital and, going to talk externally about our new product haven't changed. No. They still exist. But all of those periods in time leading up to that or between those times, yes, we're much more flexible now on how the teams go and get their work done, and they organize in the way that makes most sense to them.
I'd like to come back to that capital conversation in a minute, because that is something that many organizations are challenged with. How do they do planning cycles? How do they do investment cycles, et cetera? But before I do that, I'd like to come and talk a little about the culture. So culture is influenced by lots of things. The easiest influences are things like incentives, promotion, the trust, the environment, psychological safety you talked about. So with respect to sort of incentives and promotion, it's very clear as a specialist role. I get very good at my job, and then I become a manager. I get very good at managing people. Then I get promoted. I get very good at managing people that manage people. I then get promoted, until I'm useless, and then I'll get promoted one more time, and then that'll be it. But that's the traditional, the sort of like that model. How are you addressing, we're in a cross-functional team aligned with customer outcomes, got longevity. Is that going to be good for my career? Is that going to be bad for my career? How are you dealing with those sort of things?
I mean, I think the two things to that question I probably look at is, we absolutely still do value the mastery that our people have, and we want them to develop their mastery, and that's very important that we're preserving that. At the same time, what's most important to employees is to have a purpose, a clear sense of purpose for the work that you're doing. And what we're finding is that as we align more of the work to the clear outcomes that we're looking at and the clear purpose, people value that and being connected to a clear purpose. And I do believe that if you have employees that are more clearly connected to a purpose, they're more satisfied with the work they're doing. Yeah. Happier people are more successful and are more likely to be successful within a company. So I think that alignment with purpose, whilst preserving the development and the mastery, leads then to the happy careers that people are looking for.
It's funny, there's an author, Dan Pink, he wrote The Surprising Truth What Motivates Us, Drive is the book, and he did a TED Talk, Autonomy, Mastery, Purpose.
There we are.
So by building those self-autonomous teams by aligning them clear line of sight to their outcomes and to the customer, by giving them a very clear outcome-oriented purpose, and by supporting the professional development of their path to mastery, whether it's material science or whatever. You've ticked all those boxes. You could be a Dan Pink case study.
Maybe I've read his book or watched his sketch on the whiteboard on YouTube.
Maybe.
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's probably more likely. But it really does create an environment that is a lot more culturally ready for agile, I think, which I think is incredible. So that's nice to hear, and I think it's the way you create longevity. It's funny because the second ever Scrum project was literally, you can see it from this building. It was done by a large financial institution in Boston. And they have spent a long time wrestling. They also had an emergency project that they delivered fantastically. So first Scrum project, incredibly successful, everybody was happy. It took them another 10, 15 years to really move from that functional organization to something that's more around teams and around product and the like. And it's very challenging. And finally, they've changed their incentives. So you're a little bit quicker than them. Which is,
we'll see. I would never claim that we're done with the journey, by the way. We're really, 2.5 years in, and it feels like it's just the beginning, quite honestly. So we still have a lot of work to do now that we're modifying the organization design. We're working on the culture. We've still got all of these problems to address and these wonderful tools to use to go and solve them that we're just starting to get into. So I think there's an awful lot of work, but an awful lot of benefit that we can still get in the future.
That's awesome. I do want to come back now to this sort of capital investment thing, because we've talked very much about the teams, the skills, the disciplines for delivering, the products and services to your customers. But they don't live in isolation. They live in an organization that manages risk, that manages capital, that makes predictions to the street, etc. How you dealt with that part, the investment planning, that sort of annual planning cycle, or every 3 years, or whatever how have you managed that connection with these product teams?
Yeah. Honestly, Dave, we haven't touched it yet for ourselves. We have a very good forward planning process, as you would expect in a company like ours. We know roughly how much capital things are going to cost and what we're going to need to spend it on. So really, for us at least, you can run a lot of that capital projection process outside the work that the teams need to do.
Oh, that's good.
Now, obviously, if a team suddenly comes with 20 times the capital investment that you were expecting, that's something that we're going to need to deal with. But by and large, the experience we have in our organization, we know roughly what amounts of money we're going to spend. So actually, we can take that away from having to be held in those teams. We can let them get on with designing delightful propositions that will delight our consumers and create value, and not have them worry about exactly how much capital am I spending to, within parameters that make sense.
Decoupling the work from the planning, from that high level planning, the investments, is super important. That is a huge step, because otherwise you're going to end up always in this sort of waterfall model. But by just saying, hey, what are we going to invest at that macro level? Where are we going to invest it? You've got so much history. You know exactly generally what things cost, etc. So you then fund the teams based on that, and then get out of their way, and then magic happens. That's really refreshing to hear. How much do you have to talk about how you're working to those senior stakeholders?
That's also a work in progress. That's one of the bits of our cultural organization setup that we're working on. We get fantastic benefits from our teams working regularly and having regular sprint reviews with our stakeholders. When you look at the experience and perspective that those leaders have, it's a gift for teams to be able to engage with our stakeholders to talk about that. What becomes the challenge to find then is you say, that's great. Any team that all of these teams that we have, we're going to have regular sprint reviews with the stakeholders. The problem with that is our stakeholders are quite busy people, and they don't have the time to have a regular sprint review with every one of these programs as well. At the same time, though, they remain accountable for some of the programs. So the balance we're finding is which programs need to have regular stakeholder reviews, which are the most important ones or the ones with the highest degree of uncertainty, and with which stakeholders should we review those, versus maybe another set of projects that we can leave to be much more autonomous, they're a bit more certain in terms of where they're going, and maybe we have a different group of stakeholders, maybe lower down in the organization, that we review those projects with. So that's some of the ongoing design work that we're doing, is figuring out which stakeholders for which projects. It's clear that regular engagement with stakeholders is beneficial to everyone. The challenge is which set of stakeholders for which project.
And so stakeholder management, I mean, ultimately, I guess that's how you can help your product owners and your product teams. You know, you can help inform them. I guess that's your role and the lead, management role to help guide them. The other thing is, I guess what you're also describing is it's not a formula. We're having this meeting, we invite these 14 people. It's always no, because depending on the sprint goal, depending on where you're at in terms of the life cycle of the product, what the challenges are, what the risks are, it could mean quite different. But that's also a big problem because these people are incredibly busy. You have to book them 3 months in advance. So that's going to require some fancy footwork by you, David.
Yeah, it takes some organization, but generally, I think when the stakeholders are invested in the outcome,
they can find the time.
They can find the time. I think you have a problem when you have every stakeholder that you can imagine for every single project and they're not invested in the outcome, then attendance is an issue. But being invested in that outcome, I think the time usually comes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess, some of our viewers are thinking maybe they've just had a successful Scrum project or Agile project. They've delivered some stuff and now they're been challenged by their leaders to scale. What would be the one little nugget that you would give them out of all the things that you've said about culture, about organizational design, about finding the pain points and fixing them, don't focus on the tool, what would be that one nugget?
Yeah, it would really be really to look at what problem do we want to solve for a particular team or a particular project, and then look at what tools can come to solve the problem or the opportunity that you have. And that focus around problem solution, at least for us, is much more successful than tool adoption as a panacea for any problems that might come up.
So it's not about adopting Scrum and Agile, it's actually about solving the problems that allow you to be a 21st century organization, deliver more value to your customers, deliver more ultimate return to your investors, and also make your teams happier.
Exactly, you got it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm very grateful to be here. So as I'm sure everybody that's watching today is as well. So thank you, and bye, Dave.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Dave.